Are we live? Yes, we are live. Okay, we are live. Good. Um, yes. Pardon me. Give me a little minute, and let's see. Okay. Welcome to GER Hub Mathematics and Statistics lessons, as well as research project writing discussion. Today would be the beginning of a phase. Yes, in today's video, we shall begin our discussion on research project writing. So we shall begin our discussion on research project writing. So welcome to all of you from all over the world converged on this platform, my YouTube channel, Genesis Educational Research Hub. Okay, so GER Hub for short is the YouTube channel name, and I want to say a very big welcome to you out there, you, and you. Yes, of course, you. So welcome to the channel. Now, as the thumbnail carries it, we want to discuss how to write the background of your study. Yes, we want to discuss how to write a good background to your research. Now, it is often a problem to students all over the world writing research projects, okay? It is a very serious problem to students all over the world writing research projects. Now, students find it very, very technical, very, very difficult. Some students don't even know at all how to go about putting their research project work all together. So, in this channel, GER Hub, what we focus on doing is to teach students all over the world how to write good research projects. It is to teach students offering mathematics courses in universities, colleges, polytechnics all over the world how to learn and understand mathematics courses as well as statistics courses. But in today's video, our interest will be on research project writing. Now, what about research project writing are we going to be discussing? We will be discussing how to write a good background, how to write a background of your study. Now, let me start with telling you that a typical research project writing, a typical research project begins with what do you call it? A typical research project writing, or a typical research project, let's put it that way, comprises usually 5 chapters. That is not to say, take note, that it can't have more than 5 chapters. Yes, it can have more than 5 chapters, okay? But typically, research projects usually would have 5 chapters. So let me give you a quick breakdown of what the 5 chapters are. What is called the chapter 1 is usually called the introduction of your study, or the introduction. So chapter 1 is usually called introduction. Wherever you are all over the world and you're writing a research project at any level, be it at undergraduate level to end your undergraduate program, at graduate level, a postgraduate program, a postgraduate diploma program, and you're writing a research project, take note, the first chapter of your research would begin with the introduction. Now, the second chapter is usually dedicated to something called the literature review. Okay? So, chapter 1 is your introduction. Chapter 2 is your literature review, or review of literature. Chapter 3 is usually tagged the research methodology. Chapter 4 of your research project is usually called probably data analysis, data interpretation, and discussion of findings. Or it may be called different names depending on what you are writing. But in chapter 5, you will be writing a summary, conclusion, and recommendation. So that chapter is usually called that, followed by your references and probably an appendix if you have one in your work, as the case may be. Now, our focus is not in this discussion, today's chat. Our focus is not about discussing chapter 2, discussing chapter 3, discussing chapter 4 and 5, or every peripheral chapter to your research project. Our focus in this video is on a discussion pertaining to your chapter 1. Remember, chapter 1 is called the introduction. So, Now, that being said, now that we have been able to exclude and have been able to tell you that a typical research project comprises 5 chapters, and I've told you what each of those chapters in a typical research project is called, let us now focus on what the thumbnail says. In this discussion, please, I would encourage your chats. You can actually drop a message. It's a live stream anyway. It's a live video and it's a live chat. So you could drop your messages. I would love your comments to come in, asking questions regarding what we are discussing, asking questions on what you don't know or you don't understand about what I am saying. So we are talking about research project writing, and our focus in today's chat will be on discussing how to write the background of your study, a good background of your study. Now, before you write a good background of your study, take note, you must know in what chapter of your study do you have the background of your study. So, if we are discussing the background of your study, what chapter of the research project out of chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 do we have the background of your study? It is in the introduction, the chapter 1. So it is under your introduction that you have a background of the study to be discussed. Now, let me give you in detail the subheadings that make, the typical subheadings that should make your background and your chapter 1. That is the introduction. What are those components of your chapter 1? Depending on what field of study you are, you may be having the following. Okay, so let's start with naming them. In your chapter 1, the very first subheading you have or should have is the background of the study. The background of the study is the very first subheading you should have. Now, immediately after the background of the study, which finds itself as the first subheading in your chapter 1, comes the second subheading. The second subheading may be the statement. Subheading should be the aim and objectives of the study. Now, whichever one comes first, it doesn't really matter, but whether or not you go with the second or the third in that order, take note, the background of your study begins the chapter of that study. Now, the next thing that follows may be the aim and objectives of the study, and then follows the statement of the problem, what is called the statement of the problem. And then comes things like items like the delimitation, that is the scope of the study, significance of the study, you may have that also. You may have limitations of the study also incorporated into your chapter 1. Now, some fields would really appreciate you have as a component in your chapter 1 another key subheading, which is called operation definition of terms. Now, how many of them have I mentioned that makes your chapter 1? I have mentioned the background of the study. I have mentioned the aim and objectives of the study. I have mentioned the statement of problem. I have mentioned the significance of the study. I have mentioned the scope, also known as the delimitation of the study. I'm going to emphasize the difference between delimitation and limitation. Students all over the world, some students rather, often think the delimitation is the same as limitation of the study. They are two different things. Now, limitation of the study and delimitation are two different subheadings that may come in your chapter 1. Then, some chapter 1s usually may incorporate study area, whereas in some other project writing in another field, it may come under your chapter 3, your research methodology. Now, those other items I've mentioned apart from the background of the study are not the focus of this video. In this video, what I want to teach you or discuss is to let you know what makes up a good background of the study. Remember, it is the very first item that opens up your chapter 1. Now, that being said, let us now go into discussing properly the background of the study. Now that you know that it is the first component that should make your chapter 1, being the introduction. Okay, so now let's start with the importance. Why should you have a background of the study in your work? what do we mean by background of the study? Now, in my own experience on what should be, there is often the mistake that students make. Students usually make a particular mistake. The mistake is this: the background of the study should be one component of your research project that is written after every project content, that is from chapter 1 to chapter 5, has been concluded. So it means you shouldn't be writing the background of your study at the very beginning of your research project process. Okay? So it should be what you write into your project at the end of your research. Now, the mistake students usually make is that they start their research project writing with writing the background of the study. Now, I'm going to tell you why it shouldn't be written at the very beginning. Let's give an example. Let's give an example or an illustration of why you shouldn't be writing the background of your study at the very beginning of the study. Now, let's say you are in a relationship with a young girl as a guy. I'm talking about myself in this case. So let's say I'm in a relationship with a woman I intend to marry. Now, I wouldn't meet a woman on the very first day our relationship starts and then introduce that woman to my family as someone I would want to marry. Neither do I expect the woman to also introduce me to her parents the very first day we start dating, that she would want to marry me. No, it is not done that way. It is the background of your research that tells somebody that this is my conclusion. This is what I know about this person. This is how I would want to introduce this person to you, having known the person. So if you are writing the background of your study, it means you have already known extensively all you should know about that person. So if I'm to introduce a woman I would want to marry, I should have known that woman. So my introduction of that woman serves as the background and should come after I have known certain things or most things I should know about the woman. So to a certain extent, same also goes for the woman. The woman should know so many things about me before introducing me. So writing a background at the beginning of your is a wrong time to write the background of your study. So that being said, let us now go into what the background is. So like I said earlier, the background of your study should capture everything. It should capture a brief introduction or an overview on what the research was all about. It should capture it chronologically. Now, so what the background entails is telling us what the research is all about. Now, I'm going to emphasize in this video, aside knowing what the background of the study is, I'm going to emphasize certain key components you need to know about that will guide you in writing a good background of your study. Now, research project writing is a structured write-up or a structured writing process. Research project writing is a technical write-up or a technical writing process. So if you are writing a research, take note, you must consider the technicalities involved. Now, for the background of your study, you must look at it technically. What strategy or with what strategy can I put down a good background of the study? I'm going to suggest to you in this video, if you are listening to me, you are watching me live or would watch me later, I'm going to suggest this to you. If you want to put up a good background of your study, please go with a top to bottom flow or a bottom to top flow in putting the paragraphs in your background. So take note, you must know what the background, number one, is. You must know, number one, what the background of the study means. Without knowing what it means, you can't write a good background of the study. And I've told you, the background of the study gives you an overview of what the research project is all about or was all about. Number two, Another thing you should know about writing a good background of your study is that writing a good background is a technical process. And that means you must choose a pattern, you must choose a strategy for putting the paragraphs from the first paragraph to the last paragraph in the background together. And I'm suggesting that work with a bottom to top flow or a top to bottom flow. Okay? It will help you in writing a good background of your study. I'm going to explain that. Number 3 thing you must know about the background of your study that will help you write a good one is that in writing the background of your study in relation to number 2, that is observing a top to bottom flow or a bottom to top flow in the technicality setup of your background. Number 3 thing you must note is this. In writing the background of your study, paragraphs must link up in coherence, meaning that there must be a logical flow from first paragraph to second paragraph to third paragraph up to the last paragraph that makes the background of your study. So what in doing that, if there is a logical flow, then it means you are trying to ensure coherence. Coherence is very important in linking up paragraphs that make up the background of your study. Now, while you talk about between coherence, that is coherence between paragraphs, you must also ensure that in a single paragraph, the statements that make up the paragraph must also have coherence, meaning that statements that make up your paragraph must logically link up. Now, when you pick up the research project of a student and read it, you can tell immediately whether the background is a good background or a bad background. Okay? Now, if you read the paragraphs that make up the background of a student's project and you observe that the message is divergent, the message the student is trying to pass do not actually link up, then that paragraph or that particular background is not a good it is not a good background, because it should link up all the statements in a particular paragraph, and in turn all the paragraphs must link up. Now let's start with number 3. So those are 3 things you must ensure. Taking note of the very first one. The very first one is the one that pertains to when should I write the background of my study. I started my video, this live chat, with telling you the background of the study is best written when you have completed the research project writing process. So that is when to write the background of your study. And in writing the background of your study, the first thing to consider is what is the background all about? What should the background talk about? And I'm saying, in response to that question, the background should talk about an overview of the whole research project. What gave rise to it? Why you intended to write about that? Okay? Giving us some sort of history. I'm going to tell you, explain in detail. Now, after ensuring that, number 2 is that you must know that writing a good background involves technicalities. And the technicality means that you must observe a pattern. You may choose to go with a top to bottom pattern or a bottom to top pattern. And I'm going to explain that, like I said earlier on. The third and final thing is that paragraphs in your background must link up. And the linking up process is what I'm referring to as coherence. And while paragraphs must link up in the background, take note, statements, sentences in each paragraph must also link up. That means that sentences must have coherence with each other, and paragraphs must also have coherence. So let us start with number 3. How do you ensure that sentences in your paragraphs of your background have coherence? You should be using words that show coherence. Because when using words that show coherence, if you could use words that show coherence, that link up sentences in your background or the paragraphs in your background, then your background will sound very good. It will sound better when somebody reads your background, when somebody studies your work. So let us say, for instance, I want to write a sentence like this. Let's assume that I'm making a sentence like, over the years, so many things have gone wrong with Nigeria's political system, or so many things have gone wrong with the European political system, the African political system, the Asian political system. And because of these things, the aftermath or effect of the things that have gone wrong with African politics or political system, Asian political system, European political system has been this, that, this. That is, we've been experiencing consequences of bad political systems in continents of the world. And the interest of your work is to discuss bad and good political systems with a view to providing solutions to such problems. Now, you must take note that making such a statement over the years, it has been observed in research that so many problems or so many political systems all over the world are experiencing this, are experiencing that. Full stop. This is not to say is a sentence that ensures coherence, linking what I have just said in the very first sentence to what I'm about to say. Is a word like however could also link up the first sentence with what I'm about to say. A word like but, notwithstanding, are words that could also show coherence, linking up the first sentence with what I'm about to say. So when you want to ensure coherence or a link up between sentences in the paragraphs of your background, you should be using words that show coherence. Words like notwithstanding, however, but, nevertheless, and so on. Okay? The essence of using those words is to ensure that sentences in paragraphs of your background do not stand in isolation, because when they stand in isolation, what you are trying to communicate to whoever would read your work, a would-be reader, won't be clear. It will be divergent. But when you start using words like that show coherence, then whatsoever the message you are trying to pass becomes a message that is passed clearly with understanding. Okay? So the same thing applies to linking up paragraphs. When linking up paragraphs in the background of your study, you should be using words or phrases that link up paragraphs to the next paragraph, until you get to the final paragraph of your background. Okay? So that explains a little bit on number 3. Now, let us go to number 2. I talked about the technicality that in writing the background of your work, take note there are technicalities involved and you must choose a pattern. The technicality I'm talking about is, don't just start talking about A, from A you move to C, from C you move to Z, you come back to F. Make up your background. No, don't do that, because doing that would ensure only one thing: your work will be divergent. Whatsoever you're trying to communicate in the background becomes a very divergent statement. But when you want to write the background of your study, take note, you should go with a pattern. And 2 recommended patterns are a top to bottom flow or a bottom to top flow. What it means that in a top to bottom flow, start with a general thing, a general statement, or a general paragraph. A paragraph that talks about a general notion about what you are writing. Okay? And then move gradually to a specific thing. That is, move gradually from general to specific as it concerns what you are writing about. Let's say we want to talk about the consequences or the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on or just say, let's say we want to talk about the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy of a nation like Nigeria, a nation like Canada, a nation like America, a nation like Indonesia, and so on. Let's say you want to talk about a topic like that. Now, one way to go about writing the background at the end of the study, which should be the right time to talk about the background, is talking about, tell us, we expect in a top to bottom flow or a general to specific flow in the pattern of your write-up in the background, that we expect you to talk about COVID-19 pandemic. We expect you to talk about pandemics. You may start with talking about pandemics, and thereafter in the first paragraph or 2 paragraphs after talking about pandemics, the origin of pandemics and what pandemic mean, you can go down to the next paragraph, restricting it now. After talking about pandemics, you can now go down to the COVID-19 pandemic. In that case, I am going from a general view, being pandemic, down to the next general, being COVID-19 pandemic as a specific instance of a pandemic. Then move down again from COVID-19 pandemic to COVID-19 pandemic in Asia. If it is if for example you are talking about a country in Asia, and then you can now move down to COVID-19 in that country. What are you doing in that case? You are following a strategy in your write-up, starting with a general overview of what you are talking about, gradually to a specific instance as it concerns what you want to refer to. Now, that will be a top to bottom flow or a general to specific flow or strategy in writing the background of your study. You could also reverse the case by starting with COVID-19 pandemic in that nation and then move to COVID-19 pandemic in Asia, or COVID-19 pandemic in Africa, or COVID-19 pandemic in Europe. That is after taking the country in Europe, as the case may be, talking about COVID-19 pandemic in that country in Africa, as the case may be. You can now move to the next general thing. That is, in this case, we are looking at a specific to general flow or a bottom to top flow. So in this instance, you started with talking about COVID-19 pandemic in that country, let's say country X, which finds itself in Africa, then COVID-19 pandemic in Africa, and then COVID-19 as a pandemic, and then a pandemic. Now, those two strategies would really be of great use to you, ensuring that whatsoever you are communicating in your background as it concerns your work is not divergent. Now, whichever one you choose to use, whether a top to bottom flow or a general to specific flow, or a bottom to top flow or a specific to general flow, take note, you must also ensure that the last and final paragraph in your background should now tell us, having told us about this specific instance, that specific instance, or this general instance, or that general instance about COVID-19 pandemic in the continent, in the country, you should now tell us, state in the final paragraph where you want to come in. It is based on this and that this research project would want to talk about this or that. That should be a better way of climaxing in the write-up you call the background of your study, irrespective of the strategy you use. But if you start talking about a topic in a very divergent manner, talking about after talking about pandemic, you move away from pandemic to talking about pandemic in Asia, then you now come back talking about COVID-19 as a pandemic, and move from talking about COVID-19 as a pandemic to COVID-19 pandemic in a country in Africa or in Asia, it will be very divergent, and your readers or your would-be readers would not follow what your work is all about. So it is always good for number 2 that you follow a strategy in putting up the paragraphs that make up your background of the study. Now, let us go to number 1. So what do we say in number 1? Number 1 talks about you knowing what the background of the study is. Most students do not even know what the background of the study means. And if you don't know what the background of the study means, then how come you're writing it? You should know what a thing is all about before writing about that thing. Now, if you must write a good background of the study, then you must know what the background of the study means. And I'm saying in this live chat that the background of the study talks about an overview of your work. It talks about what your work is all about. And you can only do that like I told you earlier on, when you know you have completed the work. So, writing the background of your study when you don't even know the work at all, or you have not done the work, is not a good time to write the background of your study. That being said, thank you so much for watching this live chat on writing the background of the study. We will continue in tomorrow's video. In some other segments on research, we'll be discussing something else on research. Now, if you are watching this video live, thank you very much for staying tuned to watch this video on writing the background of your study. But if you are not watching this video live but be watching it immediately after now or subsequently, thank you for watching the video. Do drop a like. Please subscribe to the channel by clicking the subscription button below and endeavor to click on your notification bell. Okay, so turn on your notification bell, subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching. Drop your comments in the comment segment and I'll see you in the next class. Thank you very much.